Everyone, thank you very much. Please come and take your seats. We're kicking off. I am not Simon Fanshawe. I am another bald gay man chairing this session. The much less funny version in Richard Angell. I'm the Director of Progress, and I hope you've enjoyed Progress Conference so far today. This is my favourite part of the conference. Normally I'm sitting where you are, booing and jeering and heckling various members of the panel, so I'll have to try and resist that urge from up here. But we've got an absolutely excellent panel. We've got Paul Mason, commentator and activist, keen supporter of the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. We've got Phil Collins, chief leader writer at The Times and former speechwriter to Prime Minister Tony Blair. We've got Liz Kendall, MP for Leicester West, former leadership candidate and all-round bloody brilliant. We've got Wes Streeting, somebody I find it hard to have strong opinions about, but who increased his majority from 589 to 9,369. I knocked 300 votes off then, apparently. And we've got with us the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry. So we had some interesting times recently, and they've led to lots of emotions, and it's led to lots of turmoil in the country. And I personally think that if drinking gin and tonics, flirting with handsome men, and hanging out with strong women upsets the DUP, we should do it more, not less. I'm sure it offends everybody in this room that they are going to be part of this government. How do we get this Tory government out quick, and what does Labour need to do to make sure it's the beneficiaries? Paul Mason.
Oh. I thought there was questions from the floor.
No, I'm going straight down the aisle.
I think the Tory government is now in the situation that Macmillan was just before he handed over to Douglas Hume, for those of you who can remember that, surrounded by scandal and satire. Nothing about them is funny, but it's all laughable. Now, I think we should do some parliamentary tactics on them during the budget, because the budget will have to be about truth, not rhetoric. It will have to add up, unlike anything else they've done. So I think, and also, you know, they're in a perilous state because, as you say, they are reliant on the DUP. But I think let's get down to what we need to do as a party. Obviously, we need to unite as much as we can, and you know, there will always be differences between the different strands of thought within the party. But I think one thing we can do is to further concretise our offer to the British people. We can look at that swathe that more or less from the Black Country up to Wearside, where things swung to the Tories, and ask ourselves, what is the offer to them that brings that back? Because that's what we need to do to win power if Theresa May's government collapses. And for me, it is about both strengthening our offer on defence, security and foreign policy, and concretising the existing economic offer to, let's call it, you've all been on the doorstep, I hope, for Labour, you know, white young dads who often are small business owners or run a self-employed business or work in skilled work. It's fairly clear that our offer to them didn't work in parts of the country, and we need to find out something that does work, that is within our existing armoury, I think.
Okay, I'm going to hold you there. Phil Collins.
Well, as a consequence of the complete weakness of the government, there will be no prospect of them doing anything other than stumbling towards the exit on the European Union. Everything else they wanted to do has been ripped up. So politics will become a sort of wholly owned subsidiary of the European Union. And it will therefore be critical to come to a settled position on Europe, which the Labour Party does not yet have. And I say that as a compliment. One of the cleverest pieces of strategic, inadvertent genius of the last election was that nobody had the first idea what Labour's position was. And this, of course, permitted people who had voted Leave to vote Labour, and it permitted people who voted Remain to vote Labour. And it is a genuine dilemma the party faces because of the split in its support. And it was not stupid to be murky beforehand. It really wasn't. Sometimes that's a very clever thing to do. But that will not last. When real events happen, you have to choose. So I think the thing that we'll have to do is come to a settled view. I'm not even sure what my own settled view is. I don't think it's obvious what the answer is, but I think an answer needs to be found.
Liz Kendall.
I think that we need to have the wisdom to understand why we lost seats like Mansfield, as well as why we won places like Kensington. We've got to have humility and respect for the debates that must take place about how we move forward if we're going to win 65 seats to form a majority at the next election. And we're going to have to show courage on Brexit with a strong alternative to the Tories. And we are going to have to reach out across party divides, because this is the biggest challenge that this Parliament and the country faces. And I think it is our historic opportunity and duty to put forward an alternative to the Brextremists. You know, one of the best things about this election result is that all of those who claimed that anybody who questioned or challenged the Tories on their proposals was somehow anti-democratic and against the will of the people, we now have a chance to speak out and build new alliances. And in rightly trying to kick the Tories out, we have to understand on Brexit, we're going to have to reach out across those party divides to get the best deal that is in Britain's national economic interest.
By Streeting.
Well, I don't really think any of this is complicated. In fact, I think the general election that's just gone shows how, in some ways, how easy it is for a political party with a clear vision for the country that's built on hope and optimism and addressing the concerns and challenges that people face in their daily lives, how easy it would be for a party that has those things to win a general election if it is also fundamentally trusted to do the things that it promises to do. And I think for Labour to win the next general elections, we need to build on our strengths of this campaign. We did have that vision of hope and optimism. We did build a movement of activism and energy across the country. There was some cutting-edge use of social media, and clearly the Labour Party in general terms, but let's be clear, Jeremy Corbyn, with the pitch and the tone that he struck, managed to connect with a group of voters who otherwise wouldn't have turned out to vote Labour. And I think we need to learn from that, embrace it, and build on it next time, whilst also addressing our weaknesses too. Because I reflect on the way we won Ilford North. There were people who turned out to vote on June the 8th who didn't turn out before and wouldn't have turned out without being inspired by Jeremy Corbyn. But let's also be honest that there were Labour voters in my constituency or people who didn't vote Labour and in other constituencies whom are yet to be convinced that Jeremy Corbyn is the right person to lead our country. And unless we deal with that, unless we work together and Jeremy addresses those concerns, then they will still be there at the next election. We had a great manifesto that was put together in record time, but I had lots of voters saying that the manifesto, as you know, in terms of its parts, had lots of things they bought into. In terms of the sum of its parts, they questioned whether or not we would really be able to afford it. And I think there is an opportunity, I think Diane Abbott was talking about this morning, to now look at that manifesto again and to make sure that next time that we are in a position where people trust that we'll be able to deliver everything that's in it. The reason why learning from the weakness is important is because the Tories are already learning. Let's not forget, this was a catastrophic Tory campaign. It was intended to be a presidential election campaign, but the Tories soon learned that you can only build a presidential personality-based campaign around a candidate with a personality, and they won't make that, and they won't make that mistake again. And of course, they will never, ever again, I think, go into a general election assuming you can clobber every single bit of your core support, whether pensioners or anyone else, or with a diet as Sam Rushworth, our candidate. Where do you stand this time, Sam? You were Blackpool last time, but in Tatton this time. Sam said that effectively Theresa May was going into the general election in the way that the White Witch did during the Chronicles of Narnia, which is promising always winter and never Christmas. And I think that the Tories, I'm talking to Tory colleagues, they have learned those lessons. The final thing is about our unity as a party. Clearly, we cannot go on as we have for the last 2 years, throwing rocks at each other and undermining each other on different wings of the party, whether that's constant public criticism or describing people in the party as red Tories. But what we should also make sure that we don't fall into the trap of doing is where we've been under previous leaders of falling into the tyranny of silence in the name of party unity. What we need to do actually is see the best in each other and engage in policy debate and discussion in a way that is open and generous and thoughtful and engaging. Because I think when, under successive Labour governments, whenever we have won, it is by the broad coalition of the Labour Party and the Labour movement pulling together, working together, and drawing on the very best of each of the traditions that make up the Labour Party. And if we can do those things, there is no reason why we can't win the next general election. And if we don't, we know what the consequence is, which is another term of Tory misery.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, I think a good place to start is that Wes and I agree.
We've always agreed.
And we've pretty much always agreed. I think I appreciate people are tired. I know that we've had a long campaign and you've had a long day, but let's be a bit more positive, shall we? Let's start off with where the Tories are, because if the question is how do we get the Tories out quickly, the first thing is we have to recognise that they are on the ropes, right? They have absolutely no legitimacy, in my view. They may have more seats than we do, but they've had to ditch their manifesto and all their manifesto promises. So you look at the Queen. I mean, traditional old way of doing things was that you'd have a general election, they'd put forward a manifesto, they'd put that in the Queen's speech, then they'd be trying to put it into action. None of that is happening, right? The manifesto has basically been ditched. They've put in, all we know is the names of a few bills that may be Brexit bills. We've no idea what their approach is in relation to Brexit because, frankly, they have no idea. Theresa May certainly isn't governing. She may be she's barely in power and she has no idea what she's going to do. We've got a whole lot of cabinet members just freelancing and telling us what it is that they think. We've got Philip Hammond, who's sounding Labour-y these days. I mean, it's amazing. So they do not know what they're up to. They have no clear approach on Brexit. They certainly have no vision for Britain. And then we have Labour, right? Now, they have a choice. They can carry on, if they want to, stumbling from day to day, claiming that it's ever so strong that they've managed to survive yet another day, that the DUP will come riding over the hill at some point in the future and everything will be all right. They want to play it that way. That is their prerogative because they do have more seats than us. But, it sounds very like John Major, doesn't it? John Major didn't dare go to the country because he knew that Labour would win the general election. And the longer he stumbled on, the bigger our majority was. When there is a general election, we will win. And we will win because we have a positive alternative, we have a vision for Britain, and we will be a unified party. And that is what is the most important thing. We will be unified, we will be energised, and we will be positive. And we will be a great government and an alternative to this appalling government that has no idea of where it's going.
Emily, there must be one or two things we could get better from where we are now. There must be one or two things that we could do better to be in a position next time round.
Yeah, sure. We could win a few more seats. And
come on, right.
And let's do that. And let's look at, some of the places now that are marginal. Let's look at all those seats in Scotland that are now just within a few hundred, a couple of thousand. We are so close, one more push and we can win those. There are seats in the south. I visited Canterbury a couple of days before the general election. Everybody told me not to bother. In fact, I was told I wasn't allowed to go. I wasn't paying any attention. It seemed to me that when progressive people all vote the same way, they get a Labour MP, and we have to make sure that we get that message out there so that people appreciate that there is a choice between either a Labour government or a Conservative government, and they do have a chance, if they vote Labour, of getting a Labour MP and a Labour government. So yes, of course there are things and there are lessons, of course, to learn. I'm not pretending, I'm not turning my back on the fact that we lost 5 seats, but we need to address that, and we need to address the underlying concerns in relation to that. We need to be looking quite carefully in relation to particularly middle-aged, white, working-class voters and what our appeal is in relation to them, and not be complacent about that. But let's take it in context of the fact that there have been people turning up to vote who have not voted for decades, and they came out because they were energised by the star of our show that was our manifesto.
OK, let's take some questions from the audience. There's a guy in a pink shirt right in the middle. I can only see guys, so I'm not taking any more hands until I see some women.
Come on.
There's one there, and there's one right at the front, and there's 3, in fact. I'll take 4 questions.
Hello.
It seems to me that one of the main lessons...
Where are you from?
Sorry, Tal Michael from North Wales. It seems to me that one of the main lessons that we have from this last election is that if we've got a radical, fairly simple message, that can really appeal to people. And well done to Jeremy for doing that. I think there are many things where what was in the manifesto worked well compared to where we were in 2015, where, to be honest, we didn't have a coherent offer. But I think we also need to think about what was wrong in that manifesto. And in particular, we need to think about if we had to deliver it. Because actually failing to deliver what we promised would be disastrous for us in the long term. So we need to make sure our manifesto stacks up. And for me, the most important element actually was on welfare reform, where we failed, despite being willing to spend money on just about everything else, we failed to put the money in that would reverse the welfare cuts, and we failed to have a clear policy that would deliver money in the pockets of low-income people and demonstrate that work pays.
Wonderful. Okey-doke. There was a woman just over here. Who had their hand up over here? Yep. There. Okay.
So just on the point of the seats that we lost and the kind of voters that we specifically need to try to target the next time around to win, I wonder what exactly each of the panel members would think are the specific strategies for those voters. Also, just really briefly on who the coalition were that we actually managed to get to turn out this time. Absolutely agree about the young coming out in a way that hadn't been seen before. But as far as I was aware, the evidence was quite mixed about whether or not very many non-voters had actually turned out who hadn't before outside of the young. So I think also a discussion about that and whether or not with the young and non-voters we've managed to get as far as we will in terms of increased turnout, and then how we manage to both keep them and get that other group.
And what's your name? Where are you from?
Becky, I live in Camberwell and Peckham, but I'm from Bristol.
Lovely. And then there was down here, yeah, Sharon from Southampton, sorry.
Thank you, Sharon Mintoff. I'm a Southampton City Councillor in the Romsey and Southampton North constituency. My question is about the DUP. Do you think that that deal will happen? And if it does, is it legal with regards to the Northern Ireland Agreement?
And then there was the lady just in front of you in the blue. Just pass it forward. The lady here.
Hello, everyone.
Say your name, where you're from.
Oh, sorry. My name's Angie McAvoy from Enfield Southgate. Labour gain.
Hey. Nice to see it red again.
Second time I've done that today. Right, okay. Okay, I don't want to... I kind of want to ask this question, I kind of don't, but sod it, I'm going to do it.
You're amongst friends, go on.
Eh?
You're amongst friends, go on.
Am I? Good.
Straight talking honest politics is
all right, here we go.
So
right.
ask away.
Well, we keep hearing that the members are everything in this party. Well, I've been a member of this party since I was 18, and I'm in a situation now where, quite frankly, I'm a little bit scared. Well, I am quite scared to speak at my CLP meetings. My particular question is to Paul Mason. On the 11th of June, you tweeted, "Good morning. It's time to call out the bullshit of the Labour moderates. It cost Labour victory." Well, do you know what? I spent the past 6 weeks walking up and down, delivering leaflets, canvassing. We all did. I don't know what else to say now, sorry.
Okay, well, let's go to the panel. I'll start at the opposite end this time, and we'll Emily, go on.
Okay, welfare reform. The difficulty is that welfare reform has kind of been bundled into universal credit, which is a very dark box. And it is very difficult for us to know where they have got to, how it is working, exactly, where we are in relation to universal credit. So within the manifesto, to be fair on the manifesto, there was money put aside for us to be able to look at universal credit, to have some sort of idea of how we were going to look at it and to make sure that it was as effective as it possibly could be. But the difficulty has been, as you know, know is that universal credit is some great, kind of golden uplands that is supposed to deliver to everybody fairness and everything else. And obviously, it was trundling along, and then George Osborne got to hear about it, and suddenly he became keen on it because he realised that it was a vehicle for cuts, and it has essentially been stifled at birth, because it has been cut, and it has not been a way in which it makes work pay, especially not for single parents, for example. But we needed to kind of get in and see the books and then look at it. So I think that it's quite difficult for us to do a root and branch reform of universal credit until we have an idea of how far it has gone, how advanced the plans are, and to be able to look at where the problems are, because there are most definitely obvious and manifest problems, but there are many hidden problems as well. So I think we need to kind of put that in that context. I don't agree that it was just the young who voted. I absolutely don't agree. I think that when we look at marked registers, we will see that there are people who have not voted for years and years, who have been marginalised and who have felt that the two parties, there was no difference between the two parties, and they could now see that there was a difference and were energised by that. Of course, the young came out and voted, and thank God they did. But we also, we need to as well recognise that there are people who have felt that politics was not about them and who now realise that it is. And I think that is a great achievement. And I think that in relation to the DUP, I think that it is certainly questionable as to whether or not the international agreement, which is the Good Friday Agreement, is being breached if the government do go into some form of agreement with the DUP, because it is incumbent on the government to be impartial, scrupulously impartial. And so it is difficult to know how they can be scrupulously impartial if they are relying on the DUP for power. So, for example, if there was to be within power sharing, if they're trying to negotiate power sharing again, and one of the stumbling blocks has been the teaching of Irish in schools, and let's say a genuine reason is because there are not enough Irish teachers, and the Secretary of State tried to explain that to Sinn Féin or whoever, look, we can't go ahead with Irish teaching at the moment because there aren't, how can we be sure that that Sinn Féin will be confident that that has been a proper agreement? And that actually, because the problem is, if you start doing deals behind closed doors in Northern Ireland, things start to fall apart. It is all done on trust. And so if you've come to an agreement with the DUP behind locked doors, other people simply won't trust you. And that is the real worry about any sort of agreement between the DUP and the current government. And it is reckless. And it is yet again the Tories being reckless with our constitution and with our future just for the sake of their narrow party political needs. And they should not be forgiven for this, because a huge amount of work went into the Good Friday Agreement and a great deal of progress has been made. And frankly, I think that it is, I don't want to put it too highly, but it is certainly threatened by a potential agreement with the DUP. And we need to be very, very careful about that. And yes, we all worked for the general election result. And that was what was so fantastic, because in the end, as a party, we agree on 95% of stuff. There is, of course, we don't have the unity of the grave. Of course, there are things we disagree about. And so long as we disagree with each other in an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect, we are a great party. And people shouldn't laugh at that. That is something that we should be doing. And it's absolutely incumbent on all of us to behave responsibly.
But does threat of deselections of MPs, is that part of respect and unity?
So, every 5 years since I've been elected as a Member of Parliament, it's been for my local party to decide whether or not there should be a trigger balance as to whether or not there should be a reselection. And that is something that I've faced, and I know that last time 6 people voted for the trigger ballot, and I know who they are and I know where they live. But
That's the kind of unity we're looking for.
But it's always been, the way that our party has organised itself. And I don't,
But it's not before that it's looked like the front bench has wanted that to happen to certain MPs. And that's what people fear.
Well, come on, guys. Come on, guys.
But that's what people fear, isn't it?
Well, I think that it is important for members of Parliament to be representative of their local areas, but also to listen to and to work with their membership, because I think that as having a membership of 600,000 is a great strength and is something that we should be proud of and we should make sure that we work with. I saw people from Momentum working in all kinds of seats with all sorts of different MPs, And, you can't, nobody could claim that some of the seats that I saw them active in, they would necessarily be, on the same wing of the party. But in the end, that didn't matter, because Labour is Labour, and we were all working for the same goal, which was a Labour victory.
Wes Treating. I just want to pick up on this last point, really. I was very proud during the election campaign to have people from right across the spectrum of the Labour family come in to campaign for me, including people who told me they came to campaign in spite of me, but because they knew it was important to keep Ilford North Labour. And bear in mind where we were at the start of the election campaign, both in terms of expectations, but evidence-based expectations in terms of polling and canvassing returns. And I've always been proud of the fact that my local CLP has always been one where we try and make people welcome and included, and where people can have different political views without fear of being shouted down or told they can no longer perform. I mean, this used to be, by the way, thankless task, but apparently everyone now wants to be a branch secretary or a branch treasurer. But, now we've got loads of people want to do it, great, but the idea that people would be excluded because of their political views or because they're not in the right gang is not the kind of factional culture that I think we want to see in the Labour Party. And I already said about unity, and it really does cut both ways. And I think since the election, I mean, really there is a choice for all of us, and it's a choice, and we've all got to make this choice. But the choice is, in terms of leadership and direction, about whether or not we allow people to go around saying that the General Secretary or the staff of the Labour Party should be sacked when they work all hours God sends to try and secure Labour victories. It's about whether or not... I have never been afraid of my members when it comes to standing for selection. Thousands of pounds were spent trying to stop me being selected. I think £1,000 for every vote that candidate got was spent trying to stop me getting selected in Ilford North. But with deselections and with conference rule changes and all of those sorts of internecine battles, we've got a real choice. We can spend all of our times organising against each other and making sure our friends are at the branch meetings and the GCs and the party conferences, or we can spend our time working together organising against the Tories. And all I would say to people on this panel and to people out there online, whenever you talk about unity, they say, that's rich. Well, let's just put it as simple as this. You don't offer out an olive branch or accept one whilst holding a baseball bat. And that is the choice that all of us now face. Liz Kendall.
I want to go back to the first couple of questions about why we did so well in some places and not so well in others. We did extremely well amongst people with graduate or above qualifications. I think we had about a 15-point lead in that group. But the Tories have a 17-point lead amongst those with no qualifications at all. Our support amongst the middle class is the highest it's been for 35 years, but equally, Tory support amongst the working class is the biggest it has been since 1979 too. And I believe that as a party, we have always needed to hold together our so-called traditional working class areas as well as more middle class metropolitan cities. That is both how we win and put our principles into practice, but it is also right for us as a Labour Party that we continue to be the voice of ordinary working people. Two sort of observations about this. Firstly, I think politics is very volatile. We've seen that over the last couple of years. And this huge increase in support we've had in some areas, we must never take for granted, because things change very, very quickly. So we have to deepen support amongst those we got out to vote, those under 44. We did very well amongst women. But we did not do so well with pensioners and those in more traditionally working class areas. And I'm sure Wes had this and any other MPs here too. When I was doing my DL calls, you all know those, former Labour, now don't know, trying to convince them to stick with us, there were three issues that came up. top of the list was about security, about defence, police and terrorism. Secondly, it was, whilst they supported aspects of the manifesto, in total, they wondered whether we could afford it. I had one person say to me, well, I've got a big list of things I'd like to buy, but I can't afford it. So that reassurance on the economy and on defence and security is essential. And the third thing was about being strong on Brexit. It wasn't just those who voted, so Leicester as a whole voted in to remain, but Leicester West voted out. And there were some who had voted to leave who didn't think would be strong enough. But I also had lots of Remainers say to me, but I'm not sure you're going to be strong enough to lead the negotiations. So, I mean, those are the things we will have to address, you know, in places that we lost, like Mansfield, or that we just held on to in Ashfield. And let me say to you, I am sorry that you have felt unable to speak up or speak out, but I think you talk for a lot of people now who feel that awful heart-thumping feeling when you're going to stand up and if you feel you are going to be attacked. That is unacceptable. And it's not just enough for us to say it's unacceptable, we have to act on it. My own experience in Leicester West, we had the full range of people out in the party campaigning, from members, people who'd been members for 30 years to members of Momentum, and it was a fantastic campaign. I think people got to know each other, to appreciate that we're all Labour. We heard things from people who didn't like our leadership, as well as those who were inspired by him, and we have to show humility and give and take on both sides. And I would say, within 48 hours of our election result, when we really pulled together, I did have an email threatening to deselect me. But then one of our strongest Momentum members was absolutely furious and disgusted with that, because we had pulled together. We are a family with all the ups and downs and disagreements that families have, but we need to show respect, understanding, openness, humility, and pull together if we're going to fight, beat the Tories, win those 65 seats we need to form a majority. We will give you all the strength and support you need, but we must also take action, because no one should ever be afraid to speak out in our party.
Phil, before you come in, I just want to challenge Liz a little bit. If you're one of these new members watching that sat outside politics for a while, you saw Labour in government talk about how we had to reach out to the middle classes. Now we're out of office, you hear the moderates saying we need to reach out to the working classes. Is that paradoxical, and how do we reconcile those two things?
But it's part of the history of our party. We have always had that struggle to keep those two parts of our party and those two parts of our country together. And one of the worst things about the last year since the referendum vote, I think it could have been so different if, after the referendum, Theresa May had said, we have voted to leave, that is clear, but 48% of people voted to remain. There will have to be compromise and understanding on both sides to work together. I will fight for all of you. Leadership is about trying to bring people together, not pandering to one side or the other. I think we could have been in a very, very different situation now, but that's because she failed to show leadership, and that now falls to us to do it in the months and years ahead.
Okay. Phil.
Well, when you contemplate the fights within the Labour Party, the DUP in Northern Ireland seems like a small thing. I think the DUP deal probably will be done. I think, for all the reasons that Emily gave, it's unwise, undesirable, but probably not illegal, just entirely unwelcome. Tal's question about the campaign and the manifesto, I think that was a manifesto written by a party not expecting to win. It's very much like the Liberal Democrat manifesto in that respect of 2010. You've written from a defensive point of view, which you don't expect to win, you don't expect to enact it. And again, I'm not necessarily saying I'd have done anything different. That's the sort of thing you might do in that situation. But let's not kid ourselves, that was a prospectus for government. That would be a disaster to try and enact anything of that kind. I'm very grateful for the £60,000 that you propose to give me so that my children can go to Russell Group universities. Thank you very much. But I'm sure there's a better use for £11 billion of public money. And I think that question then of taking yourself seriously, which at a certain point in the cycle a party has to do, goes straight to Becky's question about the voting coalition that sustained Labour in this election. Quite a lot of people were voting Labour on the assumption that Jeremy Corbyn would not be Prime Minister. There was also a very significant number who were voting for Jeremy Corbyn very specifically. Very specifically, and I don't believe another candidate would have done better necessarily, because I do think that in all the stress on the campaign, we're missing the big story, which was the big story was that Jeremy Corbyn did something quite extraordinary. So he turned around ratings. Nobody ever does that. And he did it. And credit has to go where it's due. I don't think the star of the show was the manifesto. I think it was the leader. And I say that as someone who's been routinely critical of him, but you have to give credit where it's due. But at least some of that, the bit of the protest vote which came back from UKIP and came back from the Greens was again done on the assumption that he probably wouldn't be Prime Minister. There's a stubborn minority in Britain that doesn't want to vote for the winner. They all used to vote Liberal Democrat. And then, and then what happened was in 2010 they discovered that by accident they'd voted for the government. And they were absolutely furious, and they'll never do it again. Now, I think the coalition that Labour got at this election was made up of new people brought into politics for the first time, for which hallelujah. Quite a lot of that powered by the sense of having not participated in a European Union referendum that was then sort of taken from them. I think the Labour tribe reunited. I think you had the argument, which is dubious, which is vote Wes, not Jeremy. So you can vote for me because it's going to be okay. Don't worry, we won't be in power. So you can vote locally, not nationally. Of course, it's not really true. It won't work if Mr. Corbyn is the favourite to be Prime Minister. And then you got Labour's worst C2D performance ever. So I think Jeremy Corbyn is slowly completing the job begun by the Fabians of turning the Labour Party into a middle-class party. And the big question is, can Labour win when it begins from the assumption that it's a very serious and viable prospect for government, because it suddenly becomes very different, and the whole manifesto process has to be different too. And it begs the question also of the leader's strategy from now on. The conventional analysis, at a gathering like this, and probably from someone like me, will be that he should move to the right, move towards me. I'm not sure that's right. I'm really not sure that's right, because these are different times. His appeal is quite different. He's not done it in a conventional way. His appeal is that of authenticity rather than credibility. And if he started then moving over towards me, getting me to praise him, that's probably risking the other flank of the coalition. And I'll give you one statistic which might suggest there is a possibility of doing it a different way. In 1964, 88% of the under-25s voted in that general election. We don't have the final figure for this one, but it'll be nowhere near that, even though it'll be significantly higher than the last one. And there's 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who are coming to political maturity. That maybe the best strategy is to carry on. And maybe the minute he starts getting applause in this audience is the minute he's doing something wrong.
Thank you very much, Phil. Paul.
Well, right now our leader is addressing a 200,000-strong crowd at Glastonbury, who are, of course, singing his name. And I think the reason they are doing it is because they believe, unlike some of the people on the platform, that we are totally serious when we say we're going to tear down the free market economy and replace it with one of social justice. Because that's what that manifesto said, and that's what I want us to do. And make no mistake, as long as Jeremy is leader, as long as people like me have a share of voice, Emily, I'm sure, is the same, this is what we will try to do. Now, where I agree with some of the people on this platform, you might be surprised, is I actually do think, in technical terms, we need to move to, not so much the right, but to take some more of the centre ground in order to govern. To Mansfield, a whole bunch of Black Country seats, right the way through to Wearside. We need to take them, we need to be stronger on defence, security and foreign policy. When I say be stronger, I mean actually, we have a great foreign policy. For example, the foreign policy initiative on Saudi Arabia was massively important, not just in kind of effete middle-class circles. I met working-class people who are furious that we support Saudi Arabia. When a Labour government comes in, the Saudi Arabian love affair with the British elite will be over from our point of view. So we can offer more, however, more on policing, more on anti-terror, and more on defence. I'd like us to do the defence review in opposition. We're already, in case you don't know, very popular in the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy has understood that Labour is a big Navy party, but we could spell that out more. We could do more to concretise what we're going to do. So that's a piece of the action that we need to do. Now, in regard to your question about my tweeting and all the rest of it, I've come here to just try and have a debate with you about what we can agree on, because there's a lot we're never going to agree on. But the specific reason I did tweet that was this. I think those candidates who fought the election explicitly saying, and remember these weren't rumours, we saw evidence that campaign organisers were telling people to say on the doorstep, Jeremy can't win, I am a good local MP. If you did that, I think it then disorientated you about electoral strategy, because it combined with something we now know that the HQ didn't do right, which is whether they were using the wrong pollsters, they underestimated the strength of the surge in our favour. And therefore, even on the last night, they were fighting a defensive campaign when they could have been fighting an offensive campaign. Now,
the Leader's Office were doing that as well. Sam Tarry didn't stand for a marginal seat of Thurrock. He wanted a safe seat in Hull. He, in fact, went up against another member of the Leader's Office to do that. Everybody in the campaign.
Richard,
Then McCluskey said 200 seats would be a good outcome. Owen Jones was fundraising for Labour-held seats.
I wasn't. I said, I, as you remember quite well, staked my reputation on the idea that we could win, and I said the night before that we could certainly achieve a hung parliament. Now, look, the point about it is, though, we can learn from the people in this room, are largely from a different political tradition than me, but we're all part of the Labour Party, and the other thing is, the electorate expects us to, that electorate that isn't voting for us, Ashfield, the rest of it, expects us to deliver Brexit. I campaigned in 3 areas that I'm a jinx. We failed in all 3. Moorview, Plymouth, Bolton West, and Broxtowe. And my experience on the doorstep was that only saying Brexit will happen even got you a hearing, even got you a light in the eyes from the person who thought you were some kind of an IRA terrorist. Seriously. So we have to maintain the idea that we're going to do Brexit in a socially just way, and that's a tough call for many people for whom it's a totally existential thing to be against it. But I think the question for people in this room is, it is now a left-wing Labour Party. It is a Labour Party led by a man vilified in 14 pages of the Daily Mail and the Sun as a terrorist sympathiser, and we got 13 million votes. Do you want to be part of it or not? Because there is an alternative. There could be a British Macron. Go on, keep going. Keep going. There could be a British Macron. You could have a British totally sabotage Brexit, end Brexit, reverse Brexit, second referendum party. Run right, it could be much better and do much better than Liberal Democrats did. Now's the time.
You don't believe that, because you didn't. When you did your politics outside the Labour Party, you got very small numbers of people voting for you. You did it by entering the Labour Party and doing it behind Jeremy Corbyn.
Why do you accuse me of entering?
You were in a very different left party before, Paul. Come on.
Why do you accuse me of entering the Labour Party? I joined the Labour Party at the age of 19. My grandfather was that generation that founded the Labour Party. Marxists, I'm not a Marxist, but I will say this, real Marxists, unlike me, have a place inside Labour and always did have, right the way through back to Saklat Vala, our first Asian MP
but so does everyone in this room. The point, Paul, is that everyone in this room does, and what the lady was pointing to...
So do you want to be part of this party or not? It's a simple question.
No.
But why, Paul? The question was... That tweet and others contributed to a feeling that there are people who are not welcome in the Labour Party.
You are all welcome.
but only if we do exactly as you say. Only if we do exactly as you say. And
You are all welcome in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party.
But in one in which you're not allowed to speak your mind, or you must be bullied.
You're speaking it now. You're speaking your mind now. We're hearing it.
But you want us out if we do. You want us out if we do.
No.
What's your saying otherwise?
What
You're
do you
saying
mean?
we have
What
a
do you mean?
choice. Be in and be silent.
No, I just said. I'm sure. In case you're misunderstanding me, just listen. If you want a centrist party, this is not going to be it for the next 10 years. If it's really important to you to have a pro-Remain party that is in favour of illegal war, in favour of privatisation, form your own party and get on with it.
Right, okay. Right, let me take another round of questions. God. Right, there's a lady there. Yeah. The lady standing up, yeah. Right. Keep it calm, come on, we're going to be comrade. Let's do politics at its best. Right. Say your name and where you're from.
Hi, this is a question. My name's Anna. I'm from Hackney South, CLP. We've had an interesting week. Paul, I'm a nurse. I work in East London. I've been a party member since I was 18. How dare you make me feel that I've got to join your party? We're one party. I'm tired of people saying to me that I'm not part of the Labour Party and that Labour Party, when we were in power, didn't do anything for people like me as a nurse. I was proud when I was training to be a nurse that my qualified colleagues got a 12% pay rise. I'm proud that my best friend can get married like I could get married to a husband. I'm really, really quite traumatised by what's happened in my local CLP this week. That people that have got skills and experience that have actually, like Liz said, or Wes said, to be branch secretary, people, with their vitriolic sneering at someone like me. How dare people say that to me? I've washed the feet of people that are homeless, and I'm made to feel that I'm not someone who's got Labour going through my veins. It's a disgrace.
Polly Billington. Where's Polly Billington? There you go. Just behind there.
Hello, I'm all in favour of the kind
Say your name and where you're from.
Polly Billington, Hackney North CLP, where we manage to have both of our wings so that we may fly.
Hey.
I'm very much in favour of the kind and gentle politics, and I simply observed the fact that a woman stood up and talked about intimidation, and Paul couldn't say sorry.
I'm sorry, she didn't accuse me of intimidating her.
You didn't say sorry, Paul.
She didn't accuse me of intimidating her.
She did mention specifically
I'm
something.
sorry, if anybody wants to accuse me of intimidating
Would you
anybody,
like to apologise?
For what?
Would you like to apologise for your tweet?
For what?
For the way that it made people feel?
I'd like to retweet it. I'll retweet it now, in fact.
Right.
Right.
Before you do that,
Calm down.
I've just tweeted the IFS chart which analysed our manifesto in contrast to the other main parties' manifestos. And I take note that you said that our manifesto was going to be a platform for social justice. I note, and as anybody who knows me notes, I never go on about charts, right? So this is a big deal for me. That yes, we squeeze the rich, and I'm fine about that, but the differential impact on poor people for our manifesto was pretty much the same as it was for the Tories. Can I ask all of the panel what they would suggest is different in the next manifesto to make sure that the poorest, working people, and people who cannot work in this country get a better deal out of the next Labour government?
Ed Jones. The man in the white shirt. No, further back, sorry. The man in the white shirt.
Oh, you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Say your name, where you're from.
Ed Jones, Richmond Park. I wanted to echo some of the comments made earlier by the panellists to say that the election campaign really brought out the best qualities in Jeremy Corbyn as an enthusiastic, passionate and energetic campaigner who was able to reach out to people who hadn't voted before. Why didn't he do that 1 year ago in the EU referendum?
Okay, Phil, can I go to you first?
Yeah. Firstly, to Polly, a thought on what a Labour government might do for the poor. Something I've thought for a very long time, ever since I worked for my mentor, Frank Field, is that I have always thought that we should return slowly and gradually to a contributory principle in welfare, such that if you've worked and you've got a record of work, that you've earned a higher entitlement to welfare. I think that's right in itself. I think it'd be very popular. I also think it'd be one of the ways in which we change the immigration debate too, because the minute you start to say that work is linked directly to entitlement, and it's only there if you've done it over a period of time, then you've got a different conversation about immigration. So I do that. On the EU referendum, I am rare in that I don't really blame Jeremy Corbyn for it. I have entirely the opposite view. I was astonished at how close it was, 52-48. I think to get 48 was a fantastic performance, given what an unappealing prospect it was to argue for the European Union. I mean, I was for Remain myself, but I found the arguments very difficult to make. And it was, therefore, no surprise to me at all that we voted to leave. I don't think a better performance by Mr. Corbyn would have made that much difference. And on the big question of the hour, let me, at risk of your slightly agree with Paul. On this, I don't think we do agree. It's not true, Emily, that we agree on 95% of things. No, we don't. There's two very different traditions here. You have one set of beliefs, I have another. It would be better and more amicable if we could argue about them from separate parties, rather than over supremacy of this party. And it may well be the point, in a moment of incredible tumult, that something new emerges. If it does, it will be more civil and more courteous than you have managed to be on this platform.
Can I come next to Emily? Emily, sorry, next.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I think that was a load of bollocks. I think the very fact. I mean, I read your article, and I think that basically, you wrote it before the general election, and you've published it anyway after the general election.
Emily, how do you know that?
And I think.
Emily, how do you know that?
And
when did I write it precisely then?
Because the reason I think that the arguments may.
So if I say I didn't do that,
okay,
you're going to tell me I did.
All right. Okay, you didn't.
Right.
But
well, don't say I did then.
But the point I'm making is that they encapsulate arguments that may or may not have been relevant before the general election, but having learnt, I would hope, lessons from this general election, it completely undermines your arguments. Because the fact of the matter is that at the general election, what became clear was that there were two visions for Britain. And it's not a matter of people feeling that they were better represented by the Greens or the Lib Dems or the, hoodly-hoos, whoever it is. They saw that there were two visions. They saw a unified, energised Labour Party united around a policy offer, which was, quite frankly, I cannot see why there should be a choice between authenticity and credibility. I think that what is important is that both of those things go hand in hand, and I think that we're getting there. And I think it's really important. I think, for example, it used to be that people would argue, do you think that water ought to be in the private sector or ought not to be in the private sector? Actually, that manifesto has moved the argument on so that people are now saying, why the hell isn't water in the public sector? Why don't we own water? The fact that we've been able to move the agenda on by that manifesto has been really important. Can I just say about Brexit, because there's been quite a lot said about that. Since the Brexit referendum, the position of the Labour Party has been that we accept it, but that in the end, we have a Tory party that wants to act on behalf of the 52%, Lib Dems who want to act on behalf of 48%, and there had to be a party of statespeople who tried to bring the country together. And they brought the country together on the basis that, yes, we have to leave the European Union, but actually we don't have to go very far. We don't have to go very far, and we need to ensure that our economy comes first, safety and security of citizens comes first, but the economy comes second. And the decisions that we make have to be made against the prism of how will it affect our economy, because nobody voted to be poorer and nobody voted to lose their job. And we have said that consistently, and we have attempted to bring the two parts of our country together because we think that one party has to do that, and that party is the Labour Party. And throughout the time, since the Brexit referendum, we've heard the commentariat saying, oh, the Labour Party's useless opposition, da-da-da. And then we got Theresa May saying, oh, I've got to have a general election because the opposition are being so beastly to me, I've got to have a general election and get rid of them. So that was kind of contrary to that particular argument. And then they said, oh, well, the Labour Party's position isn't clear on Brexit, and yet they're now saying that we sound like the Tories. We have been entirely consistent in what we have been saying. We have 6 tests. We do not put down, dotted I's and crossed T's on everything in relation to Europe because it has to be part of a negotiation. But having tests against which we measure the success or otherwise of our negotiations is an entirely grown-up and rational way of approaching it. And what we are not in favour of, I went out to Brussels before the Tory party conference and after the Tory party conference. Before the Tory party conference, the discussions that I had were open and interesting, and there seemed to be movement on both sides. After the Tory party conference, after they said what they said about taking back control of laws, taking back control of immigration, all the things that we all know Theresa May said, when I saw them again, they said, well, Emily, there's no point in even discussing it. There's no point in discussing it. It's just a question of how you're going to leave and will you slam the door on your way out. But actually we have pulled it back by being completely consistent throughout this entire time. As I say, it's a subtle position. I understand it's a subtle position, but it's a truthful one, it's an authentic one, and it's a credible one.
Paul.
Let's talk about Brexit, because I have a different position to the leadership on this. I am in favour of us adopting, because I think it would fit our tests, I'm in favour of us adopting a clearer negotiating strategy even while in opposition. And I think it should be this. It should be an application to join the single market and remain in the customs union, i.e. EEA EFTA, Swiss-type deal, with a request, a firm request, for the clause section 112, emergency brake on free movement. Now, the Europeans might signal from afar that's a non-starter, but we kind of want to know that before we get into power. If it's a non-starter, because they'll push us, in other words, we have to start thinking about what would a Labour firmish Brexit look like, even though we don't want one. And to me, this is also about party democracy. I'd quite like the conference to debate different positions on our offer during Brexit. That would be a good thing to do. So, however, the thing why I wanted to do this is because I think the Tories are inept right now, but they don't necessarily always have to be inept. And the one thing that they have not yet done, but I think will do, is come forward with and they didn't in the manifesto, is they'll come forward with a concrete proposal on ending freedom of movement. The rumour is they're talking about 25k and above is freedom of movement, everything else is a work permit. Cabinet Office apparently working on this. We have discussed positions that are not actually a long way away from that, but would be far more pro-worker, far more socially just. I think we're going to have to move to a greater level of concreteness about Labour's proposal during Brexit, because we're going to be in a stage of concreteness, and I don't, in other words, I'm prepared to risk losing the strategic ambiguity, because I do also accept that it was what the surge consisted of was young voters, including some first-time voters. It was, amazingly, about 30% of ex-UKIP voters, including in places like Moorview and Bolton West, where I campaigned. And it was a lot of Remainers lending us their vote. And they're going to, next time, not lend us their vote unless it's really clear how hard we are trying to stay connected to Europe.
Wes.
Okay, I'm going to address the final answer with 3 of my hobby horses to explain how it all fits together, why people ought to stay in the Labour Party and why it's been the only vehicle for social justice. The first is Europe. We keep on talking about this through the prism of the party, but at some point we need to start talking about this through the prism of what's in the national interest. And we've got to set out a clear vision, as Paul said, a clear vision about how Labour would handle the negotiations, what our objective would be, and what the outcome would be. And for me, there is no deal, I didn't interrupt you, Emily, there is no deal that it would be as good for this country as remaining members of the single market and members of the customs union. And until we show, because there was a fudge and it worked at the last election, but until we show we've got clear and concrete answers to that question of how would Labour handle the negotiations, we won't have that one of those ingredients we need to win the next general election, which is credibility. The second issue is tuition fees, my old hobby horse. Now, when I was president of NUS, I led the organisation into favouring a graduate tax. And that wasn't just about pragmatism of trying to get government to shift and about defeating tuition fees, which evidence says does have a deterrent effect on some young people from working class backgrounds. It was about the second ingredient that Labour needs to have at the heart of its agenda, which is equity and social justice. Because that pledge was the most expensive one in our manifesto, and it involves huge transfers of wealth to people who are middle class and upper class. And I can think of 11 billion ways to spend that money better, whether removing household costs, removing the cost of households from the benefit cap, for example, would instantly make sure loads of my families who are being evicted because they can't afford to pay the rent would have that money. And there are so many other ways we could spend the money that would deliver better outcomes for kids from working class backgrounds, which is why I've always favoured a graduate tax. And so that deals with equity and social justice. My third hobby horse is taxi drivers. The reason I do so much campaigning for black cab drivers isn't just because there are over 500 in my constituency, which was majority at last election. It's because, more seriously, I think the issues that they are facing are at the cutting edge of the future of Labour in this country. And I think when you think about the way this new industrial revolution is sweeping the world and undermining job security, driving down wages and leaving people without not just an income, but a sense of tradition and identity, these experiences of my black taxi drivers will soon become the experiences of Labour across a vast section of our economy and economies around the world. And that deals with the third thing that Labour needs to win the next general election, which is a clear message about the future and about how you address security. The final thing about our place in the party and why it feels wrong that we should give up and set something new up, because that's what Paul would like too, by the way. When you look at the history of the Labour Party, and I think this has been my frustration as someone who's very proud to come from the modernising tradition of the Labour, when you look at the history of the Labour Party, from the very moment it was founded, it was a modernising principle, that it's not just enough to march through the streets and protest, you have to embrace the levers of powers to make a difference for working people. And every single Labour government has been one that has won the election on the basis of their credibility, on their vision for social justice and their vision for the future and an offer of security for people from all backgrounds, all classes, all parts of the country. And it has always been the modernising tradition that have led Labour into power. Now, there may be an experiment that says there's a different way, but I haven't given up that fundamental belief, and I've yet to see, I've been wrong about some things, but I've yet to see the evidence that unless you have credibility, a vision for social justice, and an offer of security that looks to the future, Labour doesn't win general elections, the Tories do. We've got to give them out, we've got to get them out, but I'll tell you now, the Labour Party, going back to Polly's point, will not fly without both of its wings working together, and this party needs this wing, and that's why you're right to dig in.
And finally, Liz Kendall.
You know, I completely agree with Wes on all of those points. I don't want to see this party split. We have only ever won when we have held those two parts of our party together, because that reflects the country that we seek to serve. I want to start just on the EU referendum point. Phil is right, actually. This is not to do with how Jeremy Corbyn campaigned or not. I think its support for the EU has been lost over a very long period of time. And, you know, I feel that we never had as strong a kind of national desire to be part of the EU as some other countries. We're not like France and Germany, who wanted to be part of the EU to stop the slaughter of their citizens. We're not like the Eastern European countries who were desperate to become part of the EU and escape the yoke of communism. We went in for our economic interests, but we didn't make enough. We didn't argue for the case. And if you don't argue for something, you can't be surprised when you lose. As Macron says, if you're shy, you die. And we were far too shy on our argument on Europe. Again, Wes is right. We should be arguing to stay in the single market and the customs union because that is in our national economic interest. And if we don't stand up for that, who will? We won't have the money that we need to invest in our public services or support people to get back into work. It is, as Ali, I think, said earlier, it is our best protection against, the Tories' austerity message. Stay in the single market, fight for our businesses and jobs. And I have not given up on the prospect that there are some in Europe who do believe freedom of movement has to be reformed. Just last week, one of Macron's senior advisors said freedom of movement is not inseparable from the single market. This is about the politics of it. And I think that if we can say to people can come here to work if they have a job offer, they have to pay in for 5 years before they take out, that's a fair deal. I said that on the doorstep in places where people voted out. They believed it. Let's have the courage of our convictions and fight for that message. And just very briefly to Polly, and I think this is a point Polly herself has made very strongly, as has Steve Kinnock. I don't know if Steve's gone. Hi, Steve. Which is, we have got to be the party of opportunity and security. Because it is hard to think about grasping opportunities out there when you can't afford to pay your bills and you don't know how many hours you're going to be working every week. The two go hand in hand. I would like to see us in our next manifesto grasping the issue of the self-employed. More people who are self-employed than on the minimum wage. More who are self-employed than work in the public sector. How do we give them the security of sick pay, maternity leave? How do we guarantee them the hours that they need to pay their rent? Because many people actually desperately want to be self-employed. Yes, some are forced, but others want to. We are Labour. We are the party of work, and self-employment must be at the forefront of our agenda. And just on my old, and I apologise for going on about this so many times, we have got to deal with the issue of student debt, particularly as people find it so hard now. You've got to work, in 1997, people on average wages worked 3 years to save up for a deposit. I mean, that would be just for the birds nowadays. But I want kids in my constituency to have a chance of getting to university in the first place. I want to see that money when children in my constituency start school 20 months behind where they should be in terms of their development. Why don't we put that money into the early years? Every child ready to start school. And we had a strong message against the Tories on grammar schools and a whole other lot of issues. We've got to have something positive to offer, because a Labour Party that has stopped modernising and thinking about the future on education has forgotten what it's for.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are out of time. So I think this debate could go on and on and on. But I really appreciate everyone being part of today. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I want to thank all of our speakers all day from all wings of the Labour Party. In particular, Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Wes Streeting, the member for Ilford North, Liz Kendall, the member for Leicester West, Phil Collins, Chief Leader right at the time, and Paul Mason, activist and commentator. Progress is at its best when we're having these debates, and I really hope that you support us in the weeks and months ahead as we meet the challenge that faces the organisation. Thank you very much.